Starting with chapter 3 and working up through probably chapter 9, but we'll see how far I can get because I have to limit each recording to about 12 minutes. So get your books out and open up to page 16. That's where chapter 3 begins. Basically, if we could summarize chapter 3, we'd say that it really provides a lot of characterization of Okonkwo and showing us what motivates pretty much all of his behavior. And to do that, we have to really understand his father. And so a lot of chapter 3 focuses on Unoka. When we look at the very beginning of chapter 3, we're introduced to the oracle. And the oracle is the Agbala. Now, the interpretation of the oracle always comes through a human, and that's a woman. It's a priestess. And in those days, her name was Chika. And so chapter 3 opens up with this description of the oracle, how one tries to see her, to see the oracle. No one is allowed to see the oracle himself except the priestess. And so a person communicates with the priestess, and the understanding is that the priestess really is the vehicle that delivers the power of the oracle. And so the first understanding we get of that is when Unoka went to see the Agbala to find out why he couldn't have a good crop. And he complains that he does all of the things he's supposed to do. This is on page 17. He does the correct sacrifice. He does the correct type of prayers. And he begins this litany of tasks that he completes, trying to explain that he does what he's supposed to do. And the priestess screams back at him because it's evident that Unoka has a reputation for being lazy. And so she reminds him of that. And she says, you haven't done anything to offend the gods. The problem is your own. It says, when a man is at peace with his gods and his ancestors, his harvest will be good or bad according to the strength of his arm. And there's a lot of proverbs. That's the first one in this chapter. But there's a lot of proverbs, and many of them deal with this value of hard work. And so her scolding of him focuses a lot on what he doesn't do. And in particular, it demonstrates their knowledge of the way soil is depleted when you plant the same crop there again and again, which is really the basic understanding of crop rotation, why farmers do that. So I think Achebe makes a good point of showing that they understood that the soil is depleted, and they have to continually break and cultivate new ground. And he hasn't been doing that because it's back-breaking work. And so that is why he's scolded by the oracle. Interestingly, there's another aspect of this section that gives us some insight into Unoka. Talks about his death. Now, the story itself is very vague. It says that he died of a swelling, which was an abomination to the earth goddess. When a man was afflicted with swelling in the stomach and limbs, he was not allowed to die in the house. He was carried to the evil forest and left there to die. This is on page 18. And most people agree that really what is being described here is the kind of edema that comes with protein deficiency. So if you've looked at pictures of starving, typically children, if you look at pictures of starving children, you'll see they have the great big swollen bellies. And that is edema. That tissue is swollen because it's fluid that's leaked from the cells because of a lack of protein to strengthen those cell walls. And you see that with diets that don't contain, obviously, sufficient protein. So you're getting calories, but you're not getting protein. And so most likely Unoka was starving. And in this culture that values hard work, it's interesting to note that they see, without putting a name to it, that his illness is caused by his inability to provide for himself and his family, and so he's starving. And that's the kind of, anything that's considered an abomination to the earth goddess, as you'll see throughout the book, means that that body cannot be buried in the traditional way. They are not entitled to a burial. If they respect the earth goddess, then they can't bury an abomination in the soil. It even says, the sickness was an abomination to the earth, and so the victim could not be buried in her bowels. So in other words, if you look upon the earth as being supernatural, it would be an offense to dig into this, to the earth, and insert something that's an abomination. And so that is why he doesn't have a proper burial. They just drag him. He was carried away and left to die in the forest. And you can imagine what an impact that would have had on Okonkwo, because it was obviously a very shameful situation, and it was his father, and it really sets the tone of, not the tone, but it sets our understanding for Okonkwo, and even says on page 18 that Okonkwo threw himself into it being this goal to make something of his life. He threw himself into it like one possessed. And so we always have to remember that he is so driven by this goal to never be like his father, and to never be weak or shameful, to never to bring shame upon anyone. He's driven by that like one who is possessed. That's quite a strong comparison. Okay. Indeed, he was possessed by the fear of his father's contemptible life and shameful death. That's a really important part of that chapter. The rest of the chapter goes on to describe how Okonkwo made something out of nothing. How did he become so successful? And it looks at all of the passages. It looks at all of the things he had to overcome. First, he had to figure out, how is he going to get seed yams? So you have to plant the, some yams as a seed, and that has to be done very carefully, and you have to have them to be able to plant them. So how is he going to go about doing that? He had to go to a wealthy man and ask for a loan. And the passage on page 22 in Nwakibie says to him, he tells Okonkwo why he is going to say yes. And he says that for some people, when they ask, some young men come to him for a loan, and he tells them no, because he knows that they're not hardworking. And he says, quote, "When I say no to them, they think I am hard-hearted, but it is not so. Enike the bird says that since men have learned to shoot without missing, he has learned to fly without perching." This is another proverb. "I have learned to be stingy with my yams, but I can trust you. I know it as I look at you." So he knows that Okonkwo is a hard worker and that it's a good investment. He doesn't have to worry about it being wasted on him. And goes on to explain that this was, sharecropping. So he was only going to get a third of his harvest to keep. And then also he had to, he wasn't free of the burden of caring for his family. He had to support his mother and his 2 sisters. And this was before the death of his father. And so that also meant he was going to have to support his father. And so all of his hard work wasn't just for himself. He was burdened with the task of doing what his father should have been doing. And then we get the disaster of that first harvest with the rain and the drought. So that what we end up with at the end of that chapter is a memory that Okonkwo has about getting through this terrible time. It says on page 24, it always surprised him when he thought of it later, that he did not sink under the load of despair. And we'll come back to that later, because at this point, he was able to survive this kind of despair because of his ability to work hard. And he knew, he was able to chalk it up to his inflexible will, that he was willing to work harder the next time. Interestingly, his father gives him some good advice and pays him a compliment. His father tells him, "Don't worry, I know that you will work it out. You will never be a failure." And the chapter ends with a description of Okonkwo's frustration because his father always uses words. And it says that Unoka's love of talk had grown with age and sickness, and it tried Okonkwo's patience beyond words. So he cannot stand to just hear talk. He's a man of action, not just talking and whining about things. He sees that as weakness. Displays of emotion are weakness. So even though his father is paying him a compliment, he is irritated by it because it's not action. And that's chapter 3.